Do you want to join the military?
I want to be a part of something bigger than myself. I
Want to make a difference, and you feel like you need to do it.
The U.S. military spends millions of dollars each year on slick advertising. The ads are aimed at young people. It's all a part of the Pentagon's estimated $6 billion recruitment and retention program. Recently, that effort has been directed at college students. Today on The Professors, a discussion about military recruitment on college campuses. Military recruiters have traditionally concentrated their efforts on getting high school graduates to sign up. But in 2003, the military stepped up its efforts to recruit in the college market. Hundreds of colleges and universities across the country, including the city colleges of Chicago, allow military recruiters on campus. But critics say military recruiters don't belong on college campuses.
You know, university settings should be, as an educational institution, an open institution where you know, students can learn and grow and have critical thinking, and we're not as interested in having military recruiters there.
By law, schools can prohibit military recruiters from entering campus, but they risk losing federal funding. One student we spoke to outside of Truman College is opposed to military recruiters being on campus.
When they come, they don't try to just say, can they ask you? They pass pamphlets and flyers, and they try to really push students that's already focused on other goals in education.
However, in a statement, the U.S. Army said, all students should have the right to hear the information presented by military recruiters as they decide what to do with their future. To deny recruiters on campus is to deny valuable information about Army opportunities and options to students who may be looking for alternatives, financial aid, or valuable training. But Jamel feels the military tricks students into believing that serving in the armed forces will offer them a better life.
It's not about the money and the opportunity at the end of the day, because you get a better one here with your education without having to fight.
Last year, the Army enlisted more than 11,000 young people who had completed some college education. The American Friends Service Committee says the Pentagon has recently focused its recruitment efforts on community colleges, where a larger number of minority students are found.
Because they think of people as maybe not having much of a future or a usable degree after 2 years or after city colleges. So they do specifically focus on it.
Despite some of the controversy over military recruiters on college campuses, a couple of students interviewed outside Truman College did not seem to have a problem with it.
I think it's a positive influence towards certain people because it gives them the right motivation towards bettering themselves.
I feel okay about it. I've never been approached, so I don't know how it feels. But I think that it's all right as long as it's not too intrusive.
Reporting for The Professors on WYCC TV, I'm Erica Hoke.
From across the city and the 7 city colleges of Chicago, broadcasting from 63rd and Halsted at Kennedy King College, The Professors, taking the art of conversation to a higher degree.
Hello, I'm Ted Williams, and on today's edition of The Professors, we will discuss military recruiters on college campuses. Joining us today are Dr. Pamela Smith from Kennedy King College, Antonio Vasquez from Wilbur Wright College, and Agriprocessors from Chicago State University. Welcome, everyone.
Welcome.
Okay. So today we're talking about military recruiters on campus, and I love these topics. I'm very excited about the conversation because this is a very important issue, especially being that we teach in the city colleges. I really thought about this issue recently when I actually saw military recruiters on our campus, and I talked to a group of students who really, they had no idea sort of what their options were. I think many of them had taken information, they were signing up and that sort of thing, and they were doing it with really no regard for what that really meant. And so I would like to, before we begin our conversation, because there are a lot of places that we can go with this, I'd like to hear sort of how you all individually feel about this issue before we go into all of the nuances of it. What do you all think? Are you guys supportive of it, or is it something that you think is problematic on college campuses? We can start with anyone.
Well, I have no problem with it as long as the people are free to voice their discontent with the activities and the discrimination that takes place in terms of gender issues. And my choice really would be that if you compare it to the decisions made by the Pentagon in 2005, in which they opted to lower the standards for the military to people without GEDs that were high school dropouts, and that they went and included this group called Category 4, which is people that are score on the Armed Services mental aptitude test between 16 and 30%. That means normal or average would be 50. We're looking at the bottom rung of that mental aptitude test. And you should have your mental faculties about you when you're going to make a decision quite as weighty as that.
Okay. So they lowered it, obviously.
Exactly, the dumbing down of the military.
Right, so but here, the fundamental question, and we'll continue to ask how you guys feel about this, but we have an all-volunteer Army, right? And so many people argue, then why cannot an all-volunteer Army spend $6 billion a year to recruit folks because there's no other way they're going to get people? What do you think about that, Pamela?
Well, my thought is, on a college campus, I'm in agreement with what Antonio was sharing, but when I think in terms of a college campus, I'm thinking academic. And if the student had made a choice to go military, they would not make the decision to enroll on a college campus. So for them to have that presence is a tad disturbing to me because the student made a choice to go academic. I'm pro-academic, I'm pro-military for people who make a career of that, but I don't want it to be a last resort type of position or career. They should target people who
are pursuing that.
Who are pursuing it. Maybe in
Gotcha.
high school they started ROTC, and that's the direction they'd like to go.
Okay, Agri.
Well, I think that despite the general antipathy against military recruitment on college campuses, we know that colleges and recruitment and training has been going on since 1819 in this country. So ROTC was set up in the 1916, and it has sustained its presence on college campuses. So that is one form of recruitment that has been going on. The one that was found most objectionable recently and became a matter of law was the one that had to do with the employment discrimination that the law schools found. So in general, my feeling is that as long as recruitment on college campuses does not involve the violation of law, it should be allowed to happen. And why that is involved, it should be challenged, and should be challenged more strongly.
Okay. Well, here's really where this debate is happening today, okay? So if we look at who's being recruited, this is a real big issue. 40% of all recruits are actually from the South, and they come from primarily rural or poor areas. In fact, 3/4 of all the people who died in the Iraqi war were from towns where the median income was below the national average. And so what we're seeing is, and it's not necessarily, because I've done a lot of thinking about this and research on this. Originally I was thinking, okay, maybe it's a race issue. It's not as much race. If you see the way that it's laid out, the percentages are pretty even across races.
So it's socioeconomic.
It's really financial and socioeconomic for the most part, because people feel like these are the options that they have. And so I think that, for me, as I begin to think about the issue, I am not necessarily opposed to recruiters on campus either. But in all of my time, and I will say this, and hopefully I won't get shot for saying this, but in all of my years at city colleges, for years, in our environment, I saw only military recruiters, and I never saw any big corporations coming to recruit our students. Now, truthfully, I must say that through reinvention, I'm beginning to see sort of more connections with institutions and partnerships and corporations, which I think is a very good thing. But in reality, there is this perception that for many of our students, this is the only option that they have. And that's, I think, is a real problem.
I agree. There was a movie that aired at UIC, and they addressed the issue also. It was entitled Yo Soy El Army, about how the RAND Corporation had suggested that the path to citizenship would be one option that would attract Latinos to go into the military, therefore they should be overrepresented as a population.
Wow.
Making 15% of the total population, but only 10% of the military, that number should be 20% or 25%, so it gives them a path to go in. And again, you're talking about the idea of low income, and that's an issue. Suppose you're a student that wants to go to college. The typical student loan debt that someone leaves school with is $25,000 in 2011. So if you're from a poor family and it's going to be very difficult to get any kind of help, any kind of support, you're afraid of taking out that many loans, then you're right, that option seems constrained to going in and joining the military.
Maybe the issue really is the cost of college education. Maybe that's the issue we should be talking about in this, because that probably is as much to blame as anything for this.
Well, I have a little bit of a different take on what the comment you have just made, and it goes this way. Those who attend city colleges and other colleges have a lot of options in terms of skills. The Obama job training that he has launched is to increase skills. The difficulty of getting jobs, especially for young people these days, is how to match their own skills with what the employers are looking for. So, but that would take 2 to 3 years for a number of them to get there, to get the skills that will give them lifetime employment with livable wage. So the military comes, you go to boot camp for about 3 months, and within a year you are in a career path to become a professional soldier. So it's enticing for that way, because you can skip college and still have a career that can pay for some of the things you need to pay. So I think it is not that they don't have any choice at all. They do have choices, but the military is enticing because to a young man who is impressionable, the recruiters come and say, we'll offer you an opportunity to travel.
Absolutely.
Well, I have 2 stories from actual experiences of students to sort of both edges of that. I had a student in my class who was out of the military, was an MP, had the training to become a first responder in terms of police activity here. Because of the unemployment problems that are among youth, which is at 18%, 10% more than for adults, he couldn't get a job because of cutbacks at state level, at county level, at city level. So he could not become the policeman that he hoped to be trained for, and he had to go back and take another tour in the military, even though he was already suffering post-traumatic stress syndrome, because he wanted to be independent, he wanted to be free.
So the issue may not be that there are not other options, because I would argue you're right, there are plenty of other options. But the military option is a pretty good one compared to a lot of the options that exist.
Yeah, it's enticing in the sense that here is a young person who has probably nothing in the bank. The recruiters come and say, oh, we are going to give you $10,000 in bonuses. All you need to do is sign up. And they make these many promises without emphasizing the absolute dangers involved in military service, which includes giving up your life. So to the young person, they are looking at this money, they are looking at the possibility of coming back to pay tuition if they do come back at all.
Absolutely.
So these are more enticing than the rigor of college, which requires that you sit at the table, you read and read for years before you can qualify to apply for certain jobs.
Well, and then the other thing is, and I know Pamela had to, you hop in on this, but the other thing is that, there are no guarantees with education right now. You know, and so you got so many people who are graduating from college with 4-year degrees, with master's degrees beyond, and still looking for work. And this is guaranteed employment, guaranteed income. This is a track, and I think that is what makes it very appealing.
Well, I was going to share what Akbar was talking about with the recruiters. They make these promises, and he's absolutely right that they do not share the ultimate sacrifice, which would be life or limb.
Just to speak to that, there is an organization right now called Truth in Recruiting. And it's actually a veterans organization. And what they're doing is they are speaking to exactly what you're saying, because what happens, and I've got stories of students, and I've actually went to, not a student, but a friend of mine, a young man, I went to the recruiter with him probably 2 months ago. And, the truth was that this is what he wanted to do, but they never ever talked about, all of the other issues that come up. And I think it's really, I think it's a problem, but go ahead.
Well, one of the things that the military is doing now, they've set aside May 20th as a day where they will, reinvent in truth in military, so that they would share all the facts. But I, too, have 2 stories where I have students who have been in the military, and now they're using their GI Bill to come back and attend college, but they have issues, post-traumatic stress syndrome, very difficult challenges with completing class work, and these are people in their early 20s. And so I think in having that truth in telling about what the military involves, that needs to be, I guess, expressed.
Absolutely.
That needs to be expressed.
And for me, I have also a positive story. I have a friend whose brother went in the military, and he was sort of a ragtag person before he entered. It cleaned up his life. He had discipline. Now, this was during the time when we were at peace. And he developed the skills and the time management skills to become a CEO. So
have we ever been at peace?
That's true.
That's the question I asked.
And now, the other thing you mentioned about the issue with jobs is that if you look at the number of students that are graduating and you simply go in and type in the word lost generation, that'll describe the students graduating from 2007 through 2011, that they can't find jobs. I have a friend at home, his son is at home, a chemical engineer whose starting salary usually is in the $80,000 range, been out of work for 3 years. Wow. Chemical engineer, 3 years out of work, cannot find his job because you want to go ahead and hire someone, you hire another chemical engineer with new experience, or you hire a recent grad, not somebody who's not been able to find a job for 2 or 3 years.
You know, one thing I'd like to bring into the conversation, because I think this is very important, is really the legal issue around this question.
Yes.
Because at the end of the day, you know, we can debate whether they can and should be on campus all day, you know. But the reality is that fundamentally the federal government has set this up so that there is a guarantee. We were talking before the show about the Solomon Amendment and a couple other court cases. Dr. Demon, why don't you speak a little bit about that? Because I think it's very important to understand.
You know, why we are expressing the difficulties of recruiters coming to campuses and recruiting, and the difficulties of serving in the military and the attendant problems. Recruitment on campuses has actually intensified due to unfettered access that the government has given to recruiters through legal system. The Solomon Amendment, which was passed in 1994, allowed the recruiters to come to campuses. And if the campuses do not allow them or prohibit their access, to cut off funding, grants to those campuses that do not allow it. And then you have a situation where the No Child Left Behind, which has to do with middle school and high school. The Department of Defense, under the law, is to go to these schools and ask for information regarding young people who are registered in high school. And the schools must provide that information, otherwise they may lose any federal funding that they have. But in 2006, the U.S. Supreme Court, in a unanimous decision of 8-0 because Justice Alito, who was part of the Third Circuit that decided in favor of the law schools, did not participate. He recused himself. Decided unanimously that the issue of freedom of speech, freedom of association, which they were claiming did not apply to the law schools. And since then, all of these schools who want federal grants and other grants have to provide access. The schools argued that the Don't Ask, Don't Tell law was discriminatory, and they are not into the business of discriminating in employment. Therefore, they would not allow recruiters. Now that is passé in the sense.
Let me stop you there for a second. I think you bring out some, you know, this is like your class. This is good stuff. You got to take out some notes here. But you bring out some very good points, and you're hitting about 3 or 4 issues that I think we need to touch on. Number one is the issue of military recruitment at high schools, which was very interesting because the UN literally has said that, and they passed this piece of legislation, if you will, as you know, UN's legislation is obviously not, you know, completely binding in that way, but that's essentially said it's a convention against recruiting students under 18. The United States never signed on to that. Now, obviously, you cannot enlist until you're 18, but we have literally thousands of military recruiters on high school campuses as well, and this has been a real problem. Seattle and San Francisco went after this. Seattle actually passed 2 referenda that essentially said they did not want those military recruiters on the high schools, and yet even once that happened, the Justice Department actually through the supremacy clause in the Constitution, essentially overturned those referenda. So this is a real battle that you're talking about. Then we're talking about as well, you're talking about Elena Kagan, and who's in Supreme Court, obviously, who, as the dean of the law school at Harvard, had a real issue because she denied access to the career services for the military recruiters. And this was fundamentally, they had a lawsuit, and they lost that lawsuit because of the Solemn Amendment. So at the end of the day, all of that being said, even though we may have disagreements with it, the federal government, including President Obama, who just came out with a statement recently about this issue, has consistently upheld the right of military recruiters to be on campus. And I think that fundamentally is where we really have to have the conversation, because I think, you know, the battle, if you will, is over on certain levels. You know, I mean it is. I didn't mean to stop you guys in that.
Well,
he got me going.
Obama has to uphold the law because in 2006, the Supreme Court decided in favor of the Department of Defense. Rumsfeld was named in the lawsuit. So Obama has to uphold the law as it is now. But the other interesting thing that has come up since then is the fact that the don't ask, don't tell policy in the military has now been de-emphasized to a point where it will go away. That will address the problem that the law schools have.
And I'm sorry, and that was their justification for barring the recruiters, was don't ask, don't tell.
Right, that's what the law schools argued, that was discriminatory, and they didn't want any employers who are discriminatory to come to their campus, but the recruiters and the Department of Defense argued that it was legal discrimination that was permitted under the law.
Interesting.
Well, that's why I have no problem with them being there. But my whole issue for me is the fact that they seem to be going in areas where they're primarily going after people of lower socioeconomic status. And you're creating a caste system like you have in India, and we're looking at, as the title of that movie, Yo Soy El Army, it was a creation of a military caste. And that's where I have the ethical issue with.
Yeah. And I'll say it again, if we had sort of, there is the law, there's equal access. So for the military, actually there are schools in which the military actually is banned from going to. And those are schools that ban other employers as well. So if you have sort of an equal ban across the board, but it has to be equal access if you're allowing other employers in. And all I would want to see, especially for our population of students that we serve, is I want to see that equal access. I want to see for every military recruiter there, I want to see a corporate recruiter as well, and I want to see those students understand that.
You want to have the full set of array of options.
Yes, and then even when it comes to the government, I have personally approached the State Department on a couple of different occasions to come and talk to my students about careers in foreign service. And to their credit, they did this a couple of years ago, but this year I have called them multiple times and tried to get that. And so I just think that, you know, we've got to be able to have, you know, them see what their full options are.
And that's exactly what you have to do in the role as a professor. So I know we're bringing over somebody from Edward Jones. They're going to talk to our students about careers of financial services. That is, each one of us can impact the students that we have in our own campus by showing these students options they can pursue so that they don't see this constrained set of opportunities they have in life. And that's really key.
And we want to make sure that they read the fine print. There's some cases where the recruiters are just very persistent.
Oh, you bring up an excellent point. You really
and
do.
making sure that the students follow through because there's, I believe, some type of document in which they sign that says that they can change their mind before they actually
delayed entry.
Yes, and
but
check this out. I literally just read about this situation. There's a congressman, I believe, in Texas who has been going after violations on recruitment.
Oh, yes.
And between 05 and 07, the number of violations actually doubled because recruiters were saying things to students like, hey, you know, if you don't, you know, you sign this, and if you don't, you know, fulfill this obligation, you know, you're going to go to jail, you know, all these kinds of things. And so that's a real problem as well.
Well, that's why they set aside May 20th.
Yes, for the ethical, for checking those ethical violations.
And you're correct about the fine print, because I have a story that goes back to when I was in high school in the 1970s. My friend,
see, I didn't know you. See, I would have given you the 80s, you know. So
well, my friend John, let's just call him John. He ends up going to Daly because he wants to be a pilot, and so they have an aeronautical engineering program. So he goes to Daly. He goes and takes flight lessons at the airport, and he's promised by his recruiter that he's going to fly airplanes. Right, so he goes down to Chinook Air Force Base in the southern part of Illinois. In his first placement, he's cleaning the fins on big giant radiators in Cheyenne, Wyoming.
Wow.
And so he was promised you're going to fly copters and fly planes, and he's covered in dirt from head to toe on heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. So you really got to read the fine print.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you guys for coming today. I think this has been a very good discussion. I think at the end of the day, you know, all of us, I hear this, that we have respect for the military. And we know, obviously, that the military is very important. And also that to have a volunteer army, you have to have some level of recruitment. I think it appears from our conversation that all of us also are very concerned about our students. And we just want to make sure that our students understand the full array of their options. And we want to protect them in that way. And I think that's very important. So thank you for joining us for this important conversation on The Professors.